Hey, and we're live. Good morning, guys. For today, we will discuss a part of communication, which is interpersonal communication, and also mention some tips and tricks on how to have a meaningful conversation with other people, and indications of how good interpersonal communication works. So first, let's just um, let's start with the quick question for you guys. What is communication? Let's have a recap. We defined this last time as yes, yes, that's right. Um, Communication is a process of sharing and conveying messages or information from one person to another, either by speech, signals, writings, and or behaviors. So, from this definition of communication, we can concur that there are many types of uh, how do we communicate with other people, and also how uh, many there are many types of communication between people. So now moving to the interpersonal communication, um, it is how we socialize between people. Interpersonal communication is how we socialize to peers, parents, colleagues, and other people. It is the entire process of exchanging ideas, information, and even emotional experiences that can be shared between people. It is uh, what we call a normal conversation between people. Uh, it may be an argument, it may be something the sender and the receiver are both interested in. It may be any topic that you can think of. So let's move on. Let's move on. The how. And so in practice, how can you have this kind of conversation? Um, how do we have a good interpersonal communication that we are able to be in the middle, not in the sides, or not against the sender or the sender of the message. So I have a checklist here on how to do that, and this is how do we validate the person's argument. Moving on. Number one of the checklist is prepare. Always prepare what is necessary, or always prepare for what is necessary in this kind of situation. There's a saying that we should measure twice, cut once. And uh, this quote is applicable to this scenario, especially where there is a lot of preparation to be used before choosing your action. Next is listen effectively. This is the most overlooked part in this checklist. If you didn't listen, you will miss some details that can be a deal breaker in this kind of scenario. Now, why do we need to listen effectively? This is so because we can actively absorb what is being thrown to you by the speaker, and we can also gather information from that um, that can be useful for our argument as well. Moving on, ask yourself, reflect based on what that person said, and is that a valuable option to change your mind, especially in we need to weigh the statement of the person. Um, this is where how well the structure of the sentence works for you. You need to be able to weigh what are the information that are needed there, what are the things that you can be able to grab from them and be of use against them as well. And moving on. Number four, be respectful. Always respect others. May it be someone higher than you, may it be someone who is lower than you. Yan. Respect is needed on all these parts, especially if this a technical case or or a delicate one. Lastly, on the checklist, um, pinagsama-sama ko na lahat kasi kailangan talaga siya as in to be packed as one. Act thoroughly, thoughtfully, I mean, and carefully. You do not, you don't actually agree to any course of action on the spot. You need to wait, um, keep a record of the conversation, and behave professionally. Um, these four things should be present when it comes to argumentation, especially when you have a case, a technical case or a delicate one that can be used against you if you chose the action um, not carefully as well. You may end up in a pickle when you do that. And also, lastly, always behave professionally. So, with all this in mind, you can now validate um, the person's feelings uh, accordingly, and you can now talk to the person that can be able to the you can able to act accordingly based on what he or she said to you. Now, moving on to the latter part, which are the characteristics of having a good interpersonal communication. Here is Richard Rentoria for to discuss the following.
Thank you, Mr. Brylle, for your introduction. And I will be continuing on the latter half with the good interpersonal communication traits. There's five of them to be exact, and the first one is openness. As you read, it says that transparency opens the free flow of information that is needed for both parties. Now, there are differences between what you want to say and what you need to say. What you want to say are the messages that you will be conveying. And in order that, that message clear and understandable for the other half, which is the recipient of the message, you need, and I mean you need, to give every single detail that will be needed to make that message clear. If you don't, then it will be like listening to a radio that's full of static. Some parts are left out, some parts are not clear, making the message kind of incomplete and incomprehensible to some degree to the recipient of the message. But the second part is gratefulness. Being grateful is akin to being respectful to the other person, thus holding the other person in high regards, and is a sign of proper manners. Now, gratefulness is like a sort of respect for the other person. You're grateful that you are communicating with the other person and that you are receiving their time and attention for conducting communication, of course. And it's also a sign of proper manners because if you're not grateful or do not show respect to the other person, then they will not listen to you, creating some sort of social barrier between you two, and thus communication will always be, or at least most of the time, be one-sided. And then next one is positive attitude. This one goes hand in hand with the other one, which is gratefulness. If we read the positive attitude, it is keeping a positive attitude ensures that conflict or barriers can be avoided. Thus, will also endorse positive relationship between people. As we say, respect and gratitude, as well as positive attitude, go hand in hand together. Because if you are not positive or showing positive attitude to the other person, and you're instead showing the inverse, which is a negative attitude to the person, then you will not be received as well as you might think. Because every one of us, including me, and probably including you most likely, wants to have a good conversation with a person who shows positive attitude. If they are cursing at you, not paying attention at you, or downright ignoring you, that's a negative attitude. Then will you really want to talk to that kind of person? It's like creating a social barrier or sometimes even cognitive barriers between the two persons. Then, next one is empathy. Now, empathy allows us to sense the emotion or feeling of the other person, thus allowing us to put yourself or ourself into the person's shoes. Empathy is important because If you are a person who is insensitive of what the other person or the receiver is feeling, then you might accidentally say some things that you shouldn't have said. For example, uh, if your recipient is sensitive about something, well, let's say their sexuality, if they're sensitive about it and you accidentally say a joke that you think is harmless, but to them, because you're not feeling their emotion or you're not showing empathy, it might be misinterpreted as making fun of their sexuality instead, thus creating a barrier between you two because it will be interpreted as a negative attitude by the recipient. Next, and the last part is good listening skills. Now, as I said earlier, if the information you're not delivering is complete, or every some parts that is needed to be there isn't there, then it's like akin to listening to a radio full of static. Likewise, if the recipient is not listening intently or his attentions are divided, it's not fully on the sender or the one who is speaking, then it will also be akin to that analogy of the radio full of static. Because good listening skills is having good listening skills will allow us to interpret and register all information being shared between two or more people. That includes towards us and our message towards them. If the recipient is not listening, then it is in by part their fault for not receiving the information correctly. And likewise, if you are not listening, then it is your fault for not interpret for misinterpreting or probably forgetting some key information that they just said because you are not listening enough or your good listening skills isn't on par to the average probably, and thus could create a misinterpretation and some barriers that will form between the two of you. Thus, to have a quick recap, we will have again the good interpersonal communication, which is one, openness. The second one is gratefulness. Third one is a positive attitude. The fourth one is empathy. And the last one is good listening skills. So I hope you learned something. And once again, my name is Richard Rentoria, and thank you for listening to our lecture. Thank you.